Welcome to NetBox Heroes. This is a podcast that's inspired, of course, by the network automation in the NetBox communities, where we're featuring and we're learning from some of the awesome networking pros out there in the community. I'm Kris Beevers. I'm the CEO of NetBox Labs. I'm your host today. Our goal with NetBox Heroes is to learn about the people in the network automation and NetBox communities, and of course, like how they've developed in their careers as networkers, what the networks they're working on are like, some of the problems they're tackling, of course, how NetBox fits into the stack. Today, I'm super thrilled. I've got Garret Nowak here with me. Garrett's been in IT and networking for his whole career. And for most of that, I think he's operated and architected the network at 1111 Systems, which is a provider of globally distributed managed infrastructure, where Garrett's the senior director of network architecture. I happen to know one of Garrett's big areas of focus recently has been very rapidly introducing network automation into the company. So we're really excited to talk about that. Of course, Garret and his team are using NetBox, but also other open source tools, Grafana, Prometheus, and so on, with a lot of success. So I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. Thank you, Garret, for joining me. Really excited to have you here. And maybe I'll just ask you to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into networking.
Yeah, sure. I started actually at a company called Island Internet Solutions. So we were acquired by 1111 recently, but that's where I got my start. And I started as a tier one help desk support guy. When I interviewed with them, they asked me one networking question, and it was, "What is a firewall?" And I completely bombed it. I choked, and I couldn't even answer what that was. So I started at the lowest rung possible, and then we had a network engineer on our team, and I would just stand behind his desk all day and just like watch what he was doing. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and he ended up taking me under his wing and teaching me everything I know about networking. He left the company, so I kind of just filled his shoes and worked my way up to the architecture level, and that was 11 years ago I started. So just kind of grew into the architect position, and then saw a chance to take a stab at leadership, and it's been working out great so far. And then, yeah, like you said, one of our biggest initiatives right now is pushing network automation into our infrastructure.
Oh, really awesome. I have to make the quip, 11 years at 1111, basically through
Yeah.
acquisition, right?
Yeah.
And, you said something there that really resonates with me, and I've heard from a lot of folks, which is um, you didn't necessarily start in networking. You started in IT, but you were fascinated by the network.
Yeah.
And you were lucky to have somebody that you were able to work with, over whose shoulder you could literally stand and look. And that mentorship, it sounds like, really helped you progress in your path. Another thing I'd love to just hear a little bit about from you is um, any big lessons along the way as you developed as a networker, right? Like anything that you think people who are early in that career, who themselves are like at the help desk or standing behind a mentor, watching their screen, should keep in mind and think about or seek out if they want to develop it in their path as a networker.
Yeah, of course. The biggest thing that I see a lot of the time with some of the newer people we bring onto the team is you just have to get into it, Like there's only so much you can read in a Cisco book. For us, it's like,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, if you think this is a possibility or you want to see what happens, like go do it, Like we'll deploy virtual network devices for a lab for people and say, stop asking me, go figure it out, that type of
Figure it
thing.
out.
I think that's what network engineers do are really good at, is just figuring it out. We're all problem solvers. Like every single day, we solve problems, and that's the biggest hurdle, I guess, to getting into it, is like just go do it.
I really appreciate that. And, like some number of episodes ago on this podcast, we had, pretty sure it was Kaon from the New York Times on, talking about, I think the phrase that we've put up on posters at NetDevOps Days was, put a bookmark in the book and go do the lab,
Yeah,
right? That's really how you learn best,
yeah.
and it really resonates.
One
Got
of the
it.
messages that I gave at AutoCon Zero was, I can do something right 10 times before I really get it. But if I go do something I mess up once, it gets burned into my brain. That's the biggest thing for us, is like, go fail,
Yeah, that's such a great thought. Okay, well, great. The next thing I'd love to explore with you a little bit is, we're going to get to network automation in just a minute, but let's set the stage or set the context. Tell us a little bit about the network at 1111 and, what it roughly is shaped like, what some of the big challenges are in operating it, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So we have different parts of the network, I should say. So we have my team deals with cloud networking. We have some other people that service or do like service provider level networking for customers. We're talking about like L2 type stuff. And then we have storage networking and things like that. So my team is primarily responsible for cloud and storage networking. So we deal with roughly 30 data centers or so. And we have a typical deployment for us is a pair of edge routers that connect down to a pair of core switches. And we have core firewalls that hang off the core switches. Our core switches go into Cisco UCS, and that holds all of our compute. So pretty standard deployment, I think, as far as that goes. We're a full Cisco shop right now, but we do have some products that we're working on that would include things like Juniper. So we're starting to branch out, I guess, in that regard. But I think it's a pretty basic setup as far as like edge connectivity goes.
Yeah, although I will say, like, I think for a lot of our audience, hearing about a footprint that spans 30 data centers and like a true, kind of edge footprint is pretty fascinating, when you contrast it with like a more typical, maybe corporate or branch
Yeah.
network environment, right? So there's, real scale, real distribution, and real complexity, I think, that starts to creep in. And, I guess this is a good segue toward automation. Like, obviously, you've got some scale, you've got some complexity, you're building new products, you're introducing some, I guess we'd say, like heterogeneity into the network now. Um, what what was that trigger that caused you and the team to say, look, it's time for us to figure out how to automate some of this?
Yeah. Prior to the acquisition where 1111 took over a few companies and kind of brought us all together, I was essentially a one-man show for a couple of years. So having to manage everything by myself. Back then it was just, I had a notepad file that had a config template in it. And if I wanted to push something to all the data centers, I would create 30 configs and just like find and replace variables. I think everybody's been there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we had a change in leadership and I stepped up to take ownership of our department and started bringing in new people. And it's impossible to transfer everything from my brain over to all these other people and then have them go and, work in the network. So it was two things, it was the speed at which we were doing things. You can't just write 30 configs every time you want to do something, but it was also the standardization side of it, like if I push it, you shouldn't be able to tell I pushed the config or, somebody else pushed the config. It should look the same either way. That was a big one for us. Is like, if we're going to push these changes, they need to be standard, and we need to make sure anytime somebody touches the network that it is correct and what we expect it to be.
There's a couple themes I hear in there. Obviously the speed, right? And in some ways that's driven by the scale of your footprint, right?
Sure.
Like you just can't manage all these devices in this scale with a pretty small team in a consistent way without automation, right? The other thing that was really fascinating to hear you say, and I'd like to talk about a little bit more, is it's not just the standardization for purposes of like consistency or repeatability, which is important, but also because you've got new people entering the team, and you need them to be able to contribute pretty
Yeah.
quickly. We're gonna come back and talk a little bit about like how you drove toward that automation in a minute, but um, like talk a little bit about what it's like for somebody to come into your team and start to get started and contributing now versus before.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a little history on our team. A year ago, we started the team a year and a half ago, so June of last year, and it was me and three other guys. And our team today is 13 people. So like we're rapidly introducing people into the network. And so the biggest thing for us, is like staying in compliance or like staying in what we expect our network infrastructure to look like. So there are two sides to it for us, the technical side and I guess like the soft side of it thing, if you want to call it that. When somebody joins the team, we're not just pushing like our technical expectations on them. We're also pushing our culture and our team expectations on them. So really before we ever touch a piece of code with them, we bring them into, I just do a 1 hour one-on-one with them. I get to know who they are, what their expectations are, and I let them know what my expectations are. We kind of just set the bar as far as this is what our team looks like. And if you're going to operate in the team, this is what it looks like. This is what a fully functioning member of our team looks like. And so on the technical side of things, it really is giving them the lay of the land via the network automation that we have. So being able to expose to them like, hey, if you want to do, I know in your previous job, you might have done XYZ to get to this destination, but here's what it looks like for us. And just kind of walking them through the network automation. A lot of our new people don't have software development experience. So it's really intimidating for them to come in and, go from, hey, I know how to do this in Cisco command line to, hey, learn this new programming language, But a lot of that just doubles back to our team culture, right? So we believe rising tides raise all ships. That's a big one for us. So when somebody new comes on, we just smother them with, hey, I'm here for you. If you have a question, let me know, that type of thing. I think that really is one of the things that gets missed a lot of the times. It's like people come into the team, a new team, and I've done it before, right? Like I've come into a new team and just kind of been like, what is going on here? Like, well, like where do I even start? So we really focus just as much, maybe even more so on the culture side of things and letting them know like, hey, you have a really big journey ahead of you. Like the bar is set really high, but everyone is here, that's the biggest one for us, not even from a technical side, just from being there for people,
I think it's really fascinating to hear you talk about this because what we hear all the time, right, in the networking community and the network automation community generally is, um, I'm a network engineer. I'm not a software developer. I'm not sure how to go down this path. One of the clues here, I think, is, and it even harkens back to your, call it like your origin story for yourself, right? Like you want to position yourself to work with people in an environment that supports your progression in the direction you want to go. And that's what you've built like pretty deliberately at 1111. But that's really how the whole ecosystem is going to get to, call it like network automation Nirvana, is through supportiveness of each other, education, helping people in that progression, establishing the right organizational and cultural like rails for that to happen successfully and safely, right? Because it's impossible to expect like a network engineer who's only ever been on the command line to step into a software development and our automation environment and just magically be successful. They've got to have some help to get there, and that's, I think, what the community is about. But that's also what great companies do to build that culture of automation and progress toward it. It's not just a tech thing, right? So that's really helpful. Well, go ahead, Garrett.
I was going to say a big thing for us was shifting from a competitive mindset to a collaboration mindset. So, a lot of the things that I saw prior to becoming a leader for us was there's this like unspoken thing about job security. So like, oh man, well, if I teach that guy how I do this, this, and this, well, then he's going to be as good as me. And, that type of thing. And something that we brought to the team is we squashed all that, is if you're way ahead of everybody and you're leaving everybody behind, that's failure on our team. So we really try to shift that mindset from competitiveness with your peers to collaborating with your peers.
That's really insightful. Okay, well, let's talk tech a little bit, right?
Okay,
So like,
let's do it,
I'm really curious, given the context we have on the network and the culture, the team, and so on. Like what I understand is you had a rapid transition to automation, right? This wasn't
Oh yeah.
just this wasn't a 5 year effort. This was a kind of a 1 year effort
Oh yeah.
to, I think, majority automation in the network, right? So
Yeah.
tell us about
Now I don't even know where to start.
it.
The best thing that I can like go back to what we talked about earlier was like just do it. I mean, we spent time planning. Something that I talked about at Autocon Zero was we spent a lot of time in the planning phase where we just wanted to identify what we wanted to accomplish. So like we didn't name vendors, we didn't go down the rabbit hole on anything. We kept it really high level, and we just said, hey, if we can address 90% of our issues with automation, let's do that. Like the 10% that's really, really hard and it would take us months to develop, let's just do it later. Like let's take the
Hmm.
low hanging fruit. Let's get all of the easy stuff automated, and then we can spend a lot of time down the road developing it. Um, but it was really just like once we had that list, that 90% list, was just jumping in and doing it, man. It was just deploying servers and figuring it out. That was my first introduction to Prometheus, Grafana, and NetBox. I mean, I had software development experience, so I was familiar with things like Linux. But other than that, it was just deploying these things, messing up, deleting it, deploying a new one, that type of thing. And it was just like a lot of late nights of just doing it.
Just getting moving. One thing that I think I hear there, and I'd like to explore a little bit more, is it sounds like you almost like stair step your way to automation. Like, let's pick the low-hanging fruit. Um, that's actually going to save you a lot of time and energy that you can now apply toward picking the next low-hanging
Yeah.
fruit and walking your way up to automation. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about like if I have to deploy a config to 30 different sites, then I'm writing 30 different configs. That's the easiest thing to automate, man. That's a find and replace. And so being able to pick those out versus like, I want to build this self-healing network from day one. You can't, that's the 10% that we kick down the road. And so being able to identify those things, like what would make my life easier today, those were the things that we tackled first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we hear so often is like, I don't know how to get started. How do I get started with network automation? And I think your basic lessons here are just do it and pick the
Yeah.
low-hanging fruit, right? And
Yep.
like stop making excuses, basically. Like the stuff that is obvious is maybe the place to start. You don't have to go build like the architecture to automate, everything forevermore. That's not what success or the journey really looks like. Um, you mentioned a few projects in there, obviously NetBox, Grafana, Prometheus. Like, what's your automation stack look like?
Yeah, I wish I had my Autocon Zero slide up. Yeah, so right now we have a Prometheus server deployed in each of we call our data centers or our stacks pods. So we have a Prometheus server deployed in each one of our pods, and it monitors that pod's network devices. So it can range anywhere from 10 to 30 devices per pod, basically. We feed those up to a central Prometheus server. I think Prometheus calls it Federation.
Hmm.
A Grafana server will just read the data off of that Prometheus server. So we have dashboards and things like that. The main things that we look for in our dashboards are like bandwidth usage, interface errors, things like that. Just some quick counters to be able to get a feel for like where the network is at right now.
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, NetBox holds all of our DSIM and IPAM information. So, we came from separate systems prior to NetBox. So we had an IPAM tool, we had a DSIM tool. None of them talked to each other. It was this problem of like, if I update this system and I forget to update this system, well, which system is right? You know what I mean? So NetBox handles all the IPAM and DSIM utilities for us. And then we have a few other little things out there. I mean, we have something handling our config backups for us, and then that updates Slack for us so that we're aware when changes happen in the network and things like that. But I would say the core stack for us is NetBox, Prometheus, and Grafana right now, along with Autonet. Autonet is something that we built to handle the orchestration in our network. So it's just, it holds all of our scripts, our Python scripts. It does all the orchestration for us. It's what we use for all the systems to talk to each other. So they all talk to Autonet, and Autonet kind of pushes out updates throughout our network infrastructure.
I get you. So NetBox is where I mean, I guess the term we'll use is source of truth, right? Like that source of truth for the data center infrastructure, the IP addressing, and so on. And then, uh, sorry, I missed the name of the tool again.
Autonet, yeah.
Autonet. I'm going to
Yeah.
write that one down. So Autonet is an orchestration tool that I imagine is like interacting with NetBox and pulling some data out of there sometimes,
Yeah.
to orchestrate with respect to that data. And then, the other thing I'm sort of curious about, so Grafana and Prometheus are serving I guess I'd call it like the network observability
Hmm.
need, for straightforward like operational understanding of like what is happening in the network.
Yep.
Have you gone the step to like connecting Grafana and Prometheus up to NetBox in any way? So like if you're spinning up a new device, I think it's really interesting to just sort of explore like how connected have you made this whole thing? How connected do you feel like you need to make it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to start off by saying we're not experts by any means. So, when you start saying stuff like, have you thought about connecting NetBox to Grafana? That goes in my head as like, hey, I need to look at maybe connecting NetBox to Grafana. A lot of that, though, happens with Autonet, really. So instead of, each of our engineers running scripts and stuff from their own machines, Autonet is like our central area for that. So if you want to do any automation or look at any of the existing automation, things like that, that happens from Autonet. So rather than having a direct link from things like Grafana and Prometheus to NetBox, Autonet kind of handles that for us. But I mean, it sounds like I need to look at directly hooking them up. That sounds like a great idea.
I mean, maybe, but I think the other lesson here is you've progressed to what we'll call majority automation very quickly without doing some of those things, and made a huge amount of progress, right? Like, and I think sometimes what we see is teams getting a little hung up on like the right or perfect way
Yep.
to build automation, right? Like, oh, the perfect way would be, every time we spin up a new device for, that data to show up in NetBox and then for Autonet to push that stuff up to Grafana and Prometheus's config. And it's okay to have humans in the loop for
Yeah.
some things, right?
Yeah.
And you still can make a lot of progress. Um, I guess I'd like to talk next a little bit about the path, right? So now we have a sense of what like the current state looks like. Maybe let's go back to like before really kicked off on this journey. Was the state basically? I guess it was your notepad, right?
Yeah.
And find and replace,
Yeah.
and like command lines. Is that where you started?
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely it. We had the I guess the sin of having a spreadsheet for IPAM for a while. So I mean, yeah, we really did start from the worst possible starting point.
I mean, yes, but also the common starting point that
Yes.
almost everybody is at, right? So that's why I think that's why this is such an exciting conversation because everyone's where you were generally, right? And everyone wants to be where you're at now. So now, like, how'd you, how did you compose this, right? Like, yeah, I know you just got started, right? And I know you picked off low-hanging fruit, but like take us in a little bit more detail through that path to today.
Yeah, sure. Really, the first step for me was the config generation. So, I mean, no AutoNet, no NetBox. I just started figuring out how to automatically find and replace. you know, I don't want to push the buttons. I just want it to do it for me. So that was kind of my starting off point. And then I guess it kind of evolved there from like, if I have to generate a config for 30 sites, well, I need to make sure that I'm getting all the devices that I need, right? So I need to make sure I have a centralized place for all my devices. And so,
Hmm.
that just evolves into, okay, well, I'll Google open source DSIM tools. It really is. I mean, the majority of my work is Google, right? Whenever we're in our planning stages, it's just, hey, do you know anything that does this? Well, I don't know. Let's Google it. So yeah, I mean, just going from, okay, I know how to make a config. Let's make sure I push it to all the right devices. Okay, well, let's go get a decent tool that'll hold all our devices. And then
Hmm.
it goes from there. It just goes into, some of these config generations are dealing with public IP blocks. Okay, well, how do I make sure I don't deploy the same public IP block in two different spots? Well, I need an IPAM tool, So it just kind of stepped up based on necessity at that point. The easiest thing for us to solve was for the config generation, and it just made sense for us to have a centralized location for DSIM and IPAM, and NetBox having an API and things like that. Like I said, I come from a software development background, so that was just a natural fit. I kind of just started salivating when I saw API. It just kind of grew from there, I guess. It really did just start with config generation, and I need a DSIM and IPAM tool.
At risk of us being a little repetitive here, the lesson I think we keep hearing is, you got started with the obvious thing, which was config generation, and the path started to reveal itself after that almost, right?
Yeah.
Like by doing that, the next constraint became obvious. Let's get our data into a DSIM tool. And by doing that, the next constraint became obvious, and on and on and on. And I'm very sure, right? Like right now, you probably have a roadmap, whether it's in your head or written down somewhere, for where you want to go next, because the path continues to reveal itself, right?
Yep.
One question I'm really curious about that I know certainly is going to matter a lot to the NetBox community. Like kind of at the core of your network automation strategy are some open source tools, right? And something you said earlier that caught my attention. It's starting to change today, but you've been primarily a Cisco shop historically, and Cisco has all kinds of network automation tools too. Like, what led you down the path with open source? Like any learnings about like the positives or trade-offs, negatives, challenges, whatever of working with these open source tools. Just curious to explore that a little bit.
Money. I mean, you can't just like go out and start doing it with a 6-figure price tag tacked onto it. You know what I mean? It's really hard I could spend 2 years trying to get a budget for trying to go with all the professional tools out there, and for some places that works, right? Some people do have that budget and they do have that exec buy-in. Not to say that I didn't have the exec buy-in, but I kind of just skipped the exec buy-in at the start. If I was a one-man shop for a little bit, and it was just, hey man, I can drop NetBox out there for free. I know how to write Python. Linux is free. So like I had all the tools there to just go. I didn't have to spend time like writing budget proposals and things like that. I just jumped right over that and went with what was available to me. And if we mature 5 years down the road and we do end up going with professional services like that, great. But as far as like, how do you get it going so quickly? Yeah, I mean, open source was the way to go for me.
That's really helpful. Got it. Another thing that this sort of prompts for me, something you and I have talked about separately a little bit, is some of the initial challenges of getting like unstructured data that you have in spreadsheets or elsewhere into NetBox for the very first time. What was that process like for you? What do you wish was better about it? Like, let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. The first thing I guess for us was I just went into NetBox to start creating things. So I just started clicking around. I mean, we're gonna beat this horse, but just do it,
Yeah.
I just got in and started clicking around. I had no familiarity with it, so just being able to understand what NetBox expected from me as far as like what a device looks like and things like that. And once I had that understanding, I kind of dug into the API a little bit, and I knew how to format the data. I knew what to do to get it in there. So for us, it was really just understanding what the data was supposed to look like. And it really, the hardest part, I guess, is, you can fill out 50 fields for a device, right? And you can get bogged down with, okay, well, I got to make sure I have the right U height in there. I got to make sure I have the right airflow in there. But for us, it was just, I think all you need is a name, a device type, and a device role, And so for us, it was like, let's just figure out the bare requirements for it. Let's get everything in there. And then, we can like build on top of it. So my advice for getting started with it is just find the bare minimums that you need and just get your stuff in there. You can make it look pretty later, but even just having all the device names in a list in NetBox, it's like a great feeling moving from a spreadsheet or whatever it may be.
A spreadsheet to like a model. And another thing I'm just sort of curious about, like your team has grown a lot in the last year or two, right? And one of the challenges I think we hear about all the time with like spreadsheets or wikis or whatever is um, they're not shared context either, right? Like, so moving to a piece of software that everybody can log into and engage with the data in a shared way can really accelerate things. Has that been a finding that you've encountered?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most common questions when, we started with all this, right at the like genesis of our network automation was, "Hey Garrett, do you have a template for this?" And I would email a file over to somebody. Yeah, we most definitely dealt with that, but having it all in a single location is definitely a huge win for us. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Um, So, we touched on this really briefly a couple minutes ago, but I'm sure whether it's in your head or in, some issue tracking system or something, you have a vision for where you want to head, right? Tell us a little about like what you hope, the next steps on your ladder look like, or what you're focused on next.
Yeah, it's something we actually took from Autocon Zero. So when we went through our initial planning phase, I believed that I needed a single source of truth. So that was a big thing for me, right? Like if I had multiple systems that didn't talk to each other, I didn't know which one to trust. And at the time, and what worked for us at the time was consolidating that into a single source of truth. But something that we're evolving to now based off of some talks that were given at AutoCon are having, I guess, an asset source of truth, NetBox, and then having a design source of truth. So there was a really good talk. I can't think of his last name, but Jeremy from
Jeremy
MLB.
Schulman, probably,
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go. Yeah. He talked about this design as code idea. And that's something that we've taken and we're actually currently working on implementing is this idea of, yeah, we can have NetBox be our asset source of truth. So like if it is a physical asset, NetBox will be the source of truth for that. But then as far as orchestration and the design of our network, we'll hold that in Autonet. And those two can communicate to each other. And there's no duplication of information in
Hmm.
either of them. So I can fully trust each one of those systems. But it's this idea of splitting our single source of truth into these two sources of truth where each of them has a specific purpose. And then having Autonet as our design source of truth, using the assets from NetBox to make sure our infrastructure is operating how we expect it to be. That's kind of our future vision, and we work on it every night right now to implement that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can't wait to hear about it at the next AutoCon or AutoCon one or two.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, Garrett, really fast. I know there's a ton of lessons in here. Maybe the one that like we keep coming back to and have sort of beaten the horse on is like just get started, right? Like the path will reveal itself if you do that. Um, and it's fascinating to hear how quickly you can go from zero to majority automated if you just do that, right? So I think this is a great point for us to close it out.
cool.
I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us today. I think a lot of inspiration here for folks who are early in their network automation journey or their network engineering journey for that matter, right? And for those of you who are listening or watching, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully, some great takeaways here. And thanks for helping out. This is a really exciting time, I think, in network automation. So I bet you next time we talk, there will be a lot of lessons from this next phase.
Yeah, thanks,
And we'll
Kris.
see you all next time. Thank you, Garrett. Yeah, really appreciate it.